They're the ones you trust the most, the ones who never raise their voice, never seem rattled, never explode. They smile, say, "No worries," even when everything inside them is screaming. You call them calm, easygoing, maybe even enlightened. But watch closely. Behind the politeness, there's something else. A pressure building, a silence that vibrates, a storm without thunder. Because no one can stay that calm forever. We think danger looks loud, red in the face, shouting across the room, punching holes in drywall. But sometimes the real danger is quiet. It's a patient kind of poison, one that waits, bides its time, and kills slowly. Not just others, but the one who holds it in. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who's always agreeable, always smiling, and felt something off? A deadness? Like their soul's been swallowed just to keep the peace? That's not serenity. That's emotional extinction. You see it in the overly polite co-worker who never pushes back but quietly resents everyone. In the partner who never argues until they suddenly leave. In the child who never acts out, who's so well behaved until they collapse into anxiety, depression, or self-harm. In the parent who never yells but weaponizes silence with surgical cruelty. In yourself, when you've said "it's fine" so many times, you're no longer sure what you actually feel. We call them nice. But niceness can be a mask, a cage, a slow funeral for the self. Why are we so terrified of anger? Why do we trust the ones who repress it and fear the ones who express it? Why do we praise self-control, even when it means self-erasure? Could it be that the ones who never get angry aren't peaceful at all, but emotionally disconnected? Could it be that unresolved rage doesn't disappear, but mutates into resentment, numbness, manipulation? And if that's true, what does it mean for you? For your relationships? For the hidden parts of you that you've kept buried just to keep others comfortable? The most dangerous people aren't those who rage. They're the ones who smile while bleeding inside. The ones who implode quietly, who say yes when they mean no, who make themselves smaller until there's nothing left. What if the real risk isn't in expressing anger, but in never letting yourself feel it? Because what you bury doesn't die. It festers, it grows teeth, and one day it bites. But where does this repression come from? Who taught us that anger is a sin instead of a signal? And what are the unseen forces that turned emotional honesty into a threat? Let's go deeper. You weren't born afraid of your own anger. There was a time, long before the masks, before the filters, when you screamed when you were hurt, cried when you were afraid, shouted no when something felt wrong. And for a while, that was allowed. But then came the looks, the scolding, the quiet punishments. Be a good boy. Don't be so dramatic. Nice girls don't talk like that. So you learned that safety doesn't come from honesty, but from obedience. That love is conditional, that belonging requires suppression. You learned that anger makes people uncomfortable, and being uncomfortable makes people leave. And so, a small part of you died. The part that knew how to say, "This is not okay." Psychologist Carl Jung called this the formation of the shadow, the parts of the psyche we banish because they don't align with who we're supposed to be. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits in the background, watching, growing, and the more we deny it, the more power it gains. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung warned, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You don't just repress anger, you become owned by it. Not in loud, obvious ways, but in subtle sabotage, chronic resentment, passive aggression, emotional detachment, illness, addiction. The body keeping the score while the mind pretends everything's fine. Friedrich Nietzsche took it even further. He believed that suppressing one's instincts, especially powerful emotions like anger, creates not virtue, but resentment disguised as morality. In other words, when we deny our rage, we start to believe we're superior for doing so. We look down on those who express what we've buried. We confuse repression with enlightenment. But beneath the surface, a war is raging. This isn't just psychology, it's philosophy, identity, a battle between your authentic self and your constructed self, between who you are and who you were told to be. Sartre called it bowed faith, when we lie to ourselves to escape the burden of freedom. You don't want to feel anger because if you did, you might have to change your life. You might have to say no, set boundaries, disappoint others, walk away. So you smile instead and call it peace. But it's not peace, it's paralysis. The world teaches us that anger is dangerous, but only because it fears what anger could awaken in you: clarity, courage, self-respect, fire. Because anger, at its core, is not the enemy. It's the guardian of your boundaries, the signal that something sacred has been violated. And when you silence that signal long enough, you lose the ability to protect yourself. You become agreeable, likable, empty. And yet, something inside you knows. You can feel it. A tension behind the eyes, a tightening in the jaw, a quiet no echoing inside your yes. You've hidden the fire for so long. You've forgotten it was ever yours. But the fire isn't gone. It's just waiting. Waiting to show you what happens when truth is denied for too long. And the consequences are already unfolding. At first, repression feels like control. You walk away from the argument without raising your voice. You let your partner win the fight to keep the peace. You agree to the overtime, the favor, the family obligation, again, because saying no feels selfish. You tell yourself you're mature, evolved, even spiritual. You've mastered your emotions. But the truth, you've just silenced the only part of you that remembers where the line is. And now, you're crossing it every single day. The consequences of emotional repression aren't always loud or obvious. They don't knock down doors. They corrode the hinges, quietly, invisibly. You wake up tired, anxious, resentful. You can't explain why you feel so hollow, why joy feels out of reach, why your relationships feel like performances, why your body aches in ways no doctor can diagnose. It's because you're carrying something that was never meant to be buried, your truth. Neuroscience tells us that suppressed emotion doesn't vanish. It embeds itself in the nervous system. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, keeps firing. Cortisol floods the body. The immune system falters. Over time, this creates what Gabor Mate calls disease of disconnection, not just from others, but from yourself. And that disconnection becomes your new normal. You laugh at jokes that don't land. You say, "I'm fine," when you're breaking. You celebrate others while secretly envying their freedom to speak their minds. You become the peacemaker, the good girl, the dependable one. But inside, a voice is screaming. What about me? That voice never leaves. It just gets quieter, until one day it erupts in a panic attack, a sudden rage you can't explain, a breakup you didn't see coming, a diagnosis that stops you in your tracks. This is what happens when a person becomes a pressure cooker, when every "I'm okay" is a brick stacked on top of another until the structure collapses under its own dishonesty. But it doesn't stop with you. Repressed anger leaks into the spaces between people. It becomes subtle punishment, withdrawn affection, guilt trips, sarcasm. It poisons parenting, turning into emotional distance or perfectionism. It infects workplaces with quiet hostility and burnout. It shapes societies where politeness matters more than truth, where conformity is rewarded and honesty is punished. We praise emotional control, but we've confused it with emotional disconnection. Because true control doesn't mean never feeling rage. It means knowing what to do with it. When you don't know how to hold your fire, you either burn others or burn yourself. You don't set boundaries. You build prisons. You shrink. You self-sacrifice. You disappear. But what if anger wasn't the problem? What if it was the compass pointing to what matters most? What if beneath the rage is the truth you've been too afraid to speak? You're not broken for feeling anger. You're broken for believing you're not allowed to. And it's this belief, this inherited lie, that must be shattered if you ever want to feel whole again. Because healing doesn't begin with silence. It begins with rebellion. There comes a moment, quiet, disorienting, electric, when you realize you've lived more of your life for others than for yourself. More in performance than in presence. More in silence than in truth. And something in you snaps. Not in rage, not in collapse, but in clarity. You don't want to disappear anymore. This is the beginning of rebellion. Not a loud, destructive rebellion, but the radical act of reclaiming what you were taught to suppress. Your emotions, your boundaries, your fire. The parts of you were told were too much. Because maybe the real problem was never your anger. Maybe it was the world's refusal to let you feel it. To break free, you don't need permission. You need precision. You need the courage to ask dangerous questions. What am I actually feeling right now? Whose expectations am I living under? What would happen if I let the truth speak without apology, without a smile? This rebellion begins not with conflict, but with awareness. You start small. You name the feelings instead of numbing them. You pause before you say yes, and ask if you mean it. You speak the uncomfortable truth, even when your voice trembles. You disappoint others to be loyal to yourself. And yes, it will be terrifying. You'll feel guilt, like you're doing something wrong. That's just the old programming trying to pull you back into the cage. But that discomfort, it's the friction of growth, the shedding of false skins. Look at those who've walked this path before you, those who refused to stay silent. Frida Kahlo painted through agony. Nina Simone sang with unfiltered rage. James Baldwin wrote truths America didn't want to hear. These weren't acts of rebellion against others. They were acts of devotion to selfhood. They refused to be palatable. They refused to die politely. They chose wholeness over acceptance. You can too. Set boundaries like your life depends on it, because it does. Let people leave when they can't handle your truth, because the ones who stay will see the real you, feel the anger, not to unleash it on others, but to listen to it. It's telling you what matters. It's trying to protect something sacred. Anger is not the fire that burns your life down. It's the fire that burns the lies away. This is your reckoning, your renaissance. Not becoming someone new, but returning to who you were before the world taught you to be small, before you learned that love must be earned by self-erasure, before you buried your fire just to keep others warm. Now is the time to choose something different. Not silence, not politeness, not performance, but truth. Because once you've tasted it, even a drop, you'll never want to go back. And once you reclaim that fire, you'll see what it was always meant to reveal. The ultimate truth. Imagine this. You've stopped apologizing for your feelings. You've stopped folding yourself to fit inside other people's comfort zones. You no longer flinch at your own intensity. And in that space, something miraculous happens. You don't just feel anger. You feel yourself, fully, fiercely, without dilution. This is the final truth. Anger was never your enemy. It was your compass, your protector, your most honest mirror. You just didn't know how to listen. For so long, you believed that being good meant being quiet, that love required self-abandonment, that peace was the absence of conflict, even if that conflict was with your own soul. But here's what no one told you. Peace without truth is a prison, and anger, when honored, becomes liberation. You were never meant to be agreeable. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness doesn't mean you never feel rage. It means you don't fear it. You don't weaponize it. You understand it. The truth is, the most dangerous people were never the ones who expressed anger. It was the ones who buried it. Because what you repress, you become ruled by. But when you stop running from it, when you welcome it as a sacred visitor, suddenly the chaos begins to make sense. The resentment dissolves, the numbness lifts, the guilt shrinks, and in its place stands something ancient and undeniable. Power. Not power over others, but the kind that anchors you to yourself. The kind that says, I know what I feel. I know what I need. I will no longer betray myself to be accepted. This is the moment you become dangerous in a different way. Dangerous to systems that profit off your silence. Dangerous to dynamics that depended on your self-sacrifice. Dangerous to the roles you were told to play, because now you're playing you. And that is the ultimate threat to a world built on performance. You are no longer manageable, no longer numb, no longer polite when politeness costs you your truth. Now you're alive, fully. And in this aliveness, you see clearly. That anger was never here to burn bridges. It was here to light the way home. So let it. Let it show you what you've tolerated too long. Let it teach you what still wounds you. Let it carve a path through the noise. Not to destroy, but to rebuild. Something real, something grounded, something honest. And when that fire finally settles, what remains is not rage, not chaos, but clarity. You never needed to be less. You only needed to stop pretending you were. Now stand in that truth, because nothing is more dangerous to a broken world than a person who is no longer afraid to feel. And nothing is more beautiful than someone who chooses to live fully, fiercely, and unapologetically as who they truly are.